This is the Learn Jazz Standards Podcast, episode 105.
Welcome to the LJS Podcast, where you get weekly jazz tips, interviews, stories, and advice for becoming a better jazz musician. And now your host. He's a jazz musician, author, and entrepreneur, Brent Vaartstra.
Hey, what's up? My name is Brent. I'm the jazz musician behind the website LearnJazzStandards.com, which is a blog, a podcast, and videos all geared towards helping you become a better jazz musician. That's right, I just said videos. Now we're coming out with weekly videos on YouTube and on our blog. So if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/LearnJazzStandards. Every Thursday, we're coming out with new video jazz tutorials, tips, and advice. So if you, this podcast is obviously not going anywhere, but if you want to enjoy a little bit of that content too, you can. All right. Hey, listen, I'm so excited that you're here. I'm really amped up. I'm really thankful that you're spending part of your day listening to me talk, and I hope that in return, I can give you as much value as possible and help you become a better jazz musician, even if it's in just some small way. So thank you so much for listening. Now, last week we had our 2-year birthday episode 104, which we had 11 special guests, listeners like you on the show, to give us their tips and advice. And I really enjoyed that show. If you haven't listened to that one, after you're done listening to this one, listen back to that one. That was so special and really important. But now we're starting a new month. And if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that sometimes I like to do themed months. And so for this month, we are going to be doing Jazz Standards Month. It is Jazz Standards Month for the month of March on the podcast, and I'm really excited to dive into this. We're going to be talking all about learning jazz standards, and when we learn them, how to get the very most that we can out of them so that we can become great jazz improvisers. And I'm really excited about this series. It's going to be lasting the entire month, and I'm excited because we are coming out with a brand new ebook that we've been working on. Me and the team have been working on this for the last, almost 6 months now. And it's called the Jazz Standards Playbook. It's an ebook. It's also a companion course as well. And it's all about these 10 in-depth jazz standards studies that will help you level up your jazz playing just by really diving deep into them. And I'm so excited about this book. I actually just got the final draft back from my designer. It looks so great. But not only that, the content inside is... I always say this every single time, but I think it's some of the best stuff that we've come out with to date on Learn Jazz Standards. So I'm really excited about that. And so to lead up to that book launch, which is going to be coming up in the very first week of April, we're going to be doing this month of jazz standards. And I'm just going to be, kind of showing you a lot of what's going on in this book and some really important lessons that you're just going to want to pay attention to. So definitely stay tuned with us this entire month. This is going to be really an important month. So if you also want to get notified early when the Jazz Standards Playbook does come out, want to be one of the first people to know about that, you can sign up for our list. Go to thejazzstandardsplaybook.com and just sign up there, and you'll be one of the first people to know when that's coming out. So now today we're going to be talking about analyzing jazz standards, how exactly to do that, and how important it is to actually get inside and understand what you're dealing with, and how much you can really learn by just taking the time to accurately analyze a jazz standard that you are learning. So without further ado, let's jump into today's show. All right, first things first. I always talk about on this podcast how important learning jazz standards is. So if you're new, just know that. I always talk about that. And, our website is called LearnJazzStandards.com. And when we first started in 2010, it really just started as a resource for learning jazz standards, chord charts, backing tracks, all that stuff. Of course, over the years, it grew into something a lot more than that. It's really now a jazz educational resource through this podcast, through our videos, through our blog. But still at the heart of all of that, jazz standards are key for our jazz education. We need to learn them. We need to study them, regardless of whether you want to compose your own music in your own style and go off on your own way. At the basis of everybody's jazz education, the cornerstone has to be jazz standards. That's where the tradition lies, and that's where we get jazz language from. So it goes without saying, learning jazz standards is important, and that's why we want to talk about this, and that's why I'm dedicating this whole month to this. But over and above actually learning them, once you actually have learned them, It's now about actually really digging into them and getting to know them better. So we're going to really hone in today on Roman numeral analysis, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second and how incredibly important that is. But I want to start by just stating a few things when you first learn a jazz standard, what you should be looking for. I'm going to name 3 things that you should look for right away off the very top. All right, number 1, what is the form? Okay, what's the form? Take a good look at the song, and this is where, I always encourage people to learn jazz standards by ear. I think that's really the tradition. That's really the best way, and ears are important in jazz, so it's good to do it that way. But this is where you might be helpful to take out a chord chart to really take a look at things. What is the form, okay? Is it an AABA form? Is it a 12-bar form? Is it a 32-bar form? Look at the basic overarching structure of the tune. That's a really important starting place. And you may overlook that. You may look past that. I don't really need to do that. But you know what? It's really important to start off on the right foot by defining what the form is. It's important to know how many bars there are. It's important to look at the A sections and the B sections, or are there even B sections? It's important to look at how the song is structured. So that's number 1. What is the form? Number 2, what are the defining characteristics? Okay, what are the defining characteristics? In other words, what makes this particular jazz standard unique from other jazz standards? Now, obviously, every jazz standard's melody is unique, okay? So, there's always going to be uniqueness in a melody. But over and above that, what in the harmony makes it unique? I want to use a song that, a lot of people know. It's kind of a great beginner's tune. It's called Blue Bossa. Probably heard of it, by Kenny Dorham. And if I'm to look at that tune, and whether or not you're familiar with it or not, if I'm to look at that tune, what is the defining characteristic of it? Well, it's in C minor, concert C minor, the whole tune, and it pretty much stays in the key of C minor, except for when it goes to the bridge, it goes to D flat major. Now that's odd. That's different. That's what makes that song unique, is that key change during the B section, okay? So that's the defining characteristics of that song. So look at the overarching tune and look, what is the defining characteristics of this song? There may be more than one, but you need to identify them. Now, number 3, how are jazz musicians historically approaching it? Okay, this is where it comes down to the research. You got to be listening, and at the end of the day, listening is the most important thing. I've said that. It's like I should just make a recorded message of that, but it's really important. So listen to a lot of recordings of the particular song that you're listening to, but don't just listen to it and put it on in the background. Intentionally listen to it and look and listen to hear what the musicians that have played it before you have done. And if you really listen, you'll hear different tempos, you'll hear different arrangements, you'll hear different voices, different styles, and it's important to key into all that stuff so that you can be educated going forward in that song. So those are my 3 preliminary things I want you to ask. Number 1, what is the form? Number 2, what are the defining characteristics? And number 3, how are jazz musicians historically approaching it? All right, now let's get into the meat of today's episode, which is focused around Roman numeral analysis, analyzing jazz standards through Roman numerals. And this is really important to do because at the end of the day, if we really want to understand functional harmony and even non-functional harmony, understanding it on a numerical basis, and in music we often do Roman numeral analysis, it's going to be really helpful for a multitude of reasons. It's going to help us take the names of chords out of the equation and simply focus on the function of each chord in a given key center, okay? And this goes even further than just analyzing and understanding. This can really help you if you want to transpose songs into different keys. If you just understand the function of the chords in the first place, you don't really have to think too hard about what the names of the chords are because you just already know what chords are in the chord progressions because of the Roman numeral analysis. So many reasons why this is important. Now we're going to start from the very beginning because I like to be thorough, and I know that not everybody listening to this show understands how to build chord progressions or what the Roman numerals are and how they work with chord progressions. So we're going to start from the very basics, and in order to do that, we have to discuss how to harmonize major scales and minor scales with seventh chords, okay? How to harmonize them with seventh chords. And so the reason we do that is because if we can do that, we can understand what chords are functional in a major key center and what chords are functional in a minor key center. So I call these two the major and minor diatonic series of seventh chords. And this is the key to understanding how to harmonize these scales and ultimately how to know what the Roman numerals are in each given key center. So let's start with harmonizing a major scale with seventh chords. This is the major diatonic series of seventh chords. Now, if you go to the show notes today, Learn Jazz Standards /episode 105, this can be really helpful because I'm going to have all of this laid out for you so you can see it. If you're not by your computer or your phone, don't worry about that. Maybe check this out later, but you're going to be able to follow along if you just listen to me here. Okay, so I'm going to really quickly go through this. For example's sake, we're going to use everything in the key of concert C. So we're going to start with the C major scale. Okay, here's a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C, right? We all know that. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now, any scale, as long as you understand what flats and sharps are in each scale, you can build any major scale and apply the same concept to it. So what we're essentially going to do is harmonize major scales with each note in the scale, okay? So each scale tone. So we're starting with C, okay? Our chord is C major 7, okay? What's the next note in the C major scale? It's D. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, but essentially, when you harmonize this particular chord with this scale, it becomes a minor 7 chord. The main thing that you want to get out of this is what quality of chord represents each scale tone. So the first one is major, so C major 7. The second one is D minor 7, okay? So C major 7, D minor 7. Now the next note in the scale is E, and when you harmonize the scale with the 7th chord, it becomes a minor 7th chord. So C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7. Now the next note is F natural. When you harmonize that, it becomes a major 7th chord. Okay, moving right along, what's the next note? G. Now when you harmonize that, it's a dominant 7th chord. Okay, what's the next note? A. Harmonize that, it's a minor 7th chord, so A minor 7. Okay, now the 7th tone is what? It's B, half step above C, and it is a half diminished chord, or a minor 7 flat 5 chord. That's what happens when you harmonize it. Now we're just going to end on C major 7, okay? So, in total, C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, B half diminished, B minor 7 flat 5, back to C major 7, okay? That's how you harmonize a major scale with 7th chords. Now, I know I skipped out on the process of that, and you could do that by simply, if you want, notating out a C major scale, and then just simply stack thirds on top of each one of those scale tones. So you would stack the 3rd, stack the 5th, stack the 7th on top of each one of those scale tones, and you're going to come up with those exact qualities. So quickly, let's go through all the chords and say which quality they are. Okay, first chord, first scale tone is major. Second scale tone is minor. Third scale tone is minor. Fourth scale tone is major. Fifth scale tone is dominant. Okay, so that flat 7. Sixth scale tone is minor. 7th is half diminished, right? And then finally, if we go back to the 8th tone, it's major. The 1 chord is major. Now, you heard me just say that. I just said the 1 chord, and this is where we're going next, and this is going to be pretty obvious if you're following along here. Each one of these scale tones is numbered, right? How many scale tones are there in a major scale? There's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Now, we've been repeating and going to the 8th note, the octave higher, but there's really just 7 tones. So, for each one of these scale tones, if we can number them, then we can also number the chords as well. So C major 7 is the 1 chord in the key of concert C. D minor 7 is the 2 chord. E minor 7 is the 3 chord. F major 7 is the 4 chord. G7 is the 5 chord. A minor 7 is the 6 chord. B minor 7 flat 5 is the 7th chord. Okay? That's the 7 chord. So now when we talk about Roman numerals, because, if you went to, I think everybody probably understands Roman numerals to its basic if you went to basic, elementary school and all that stuff when you were growing up. So, but in our particular case in music, when we have a major chord, it's an uppercase Roman numeral. So the 1 chord is an uppercase 1. Now for all minor chords, they're lowercased. So for example, D minor 7 is a lowercase 2. So 2 I's, right? If we're looking at Roman numerals. And again, if you go to the show notes, learnjazzstandards.com/episode 105, you'll see what I'm talking about there. Now, half diminished chords, it's the same thing, right? It's still a minor chord. There's a flat 5 in there, but it's going to be lowercased. Now, the dominant 7th chord, so in this case, it's the 5 chord, G7, it's also uppercase. Now, some people like to put uppercase and a 7 next to it just to indicate that it's a dominant 7th. But in general, major and dominant chords, uppercase Roman numerals. Minor, half diminished, diminished, all that stuff, lowercase Roman numerals. If you want to identify it further, you can. Okay? So now we essentially have identified all of the Roman numerals and all of the chord qualities in the key of concert C. So the very classic, if I wanted to go through this and just start building a chord progression by using this series, is like, for example, let's do the classic 2-5-1. What's the 2 chord in C, in concert C? It's D. And we know that D is a minor chord. We just went through that process. Okay, so it's D minor 7. Okay, now what's the 5 chord? Well, we went through that process as well. It's the dominant 7th chord. It's G7. So G7 is the 5 chord. And what's the 1 chord? That's easy. We started with that one. It's C major 7. Right? We could do this with a 1-6-2-5 as well. What's the 1? C major 7. What's the 6? It was A minor. Right? What's the 2? We just went over that. D minor 7. What's the 5? G7. Okay, so that's the very basics of understanding how Roman numerals work, how to build chord progressions. Now, really quickly, you're probably asking this question right now. Okay, that's great, Brent. We know how to do major keys now. What about minor keys? Well, that's really important. We want to go over that. Now, the minor keys is a little bit more complicated because at the end of the day, we're combining different scales together. It's not just the major scale. We're combining the relative minor scale. We're combining elements of the the melodic minor scale and the harmonic minor scale together to create the minor diatonic series of 7th chords. So don't get too hung up on it. But the notes that we're dealing with is C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, back to C. So C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, C. Okay? And that's the notes we're using for the scale to harmonize this. So the 1 chord, again, I'm not going to explain the Roman numerals because I think you get it at this point. The 1 chord is obviously a minor 7th chord. It's a minor key, the key of concert C minor. The 2 chord is a minor 7 flat 5 chord, so a half diminished chord. So in this case, it's going to be D minor 7 flat 5, right? So C minor 7, D minor 7 flat 5. Now the next note is E flat. Okay, that's the minor 3rd. And if you harmonize it, it is a major 7 chord. So now we have E flat major 7. So C minor 7, D minor 7 flat 5, E flat major 7. And the 4 chord, what's the next note? It's F. And if we harmonize that, it's just a basic minor 7 chord. Okay, so far, C minor 7, 1 chord, D minor 7 flat 5, 2 chord, E flat major 7, 3 chord, F minor 7, the minor 4 chord. Okay, now we have, for the 5 chord, our root note is G, and it's a dominant 7th chord, right? That 5 chord, by the way, is always a dominant 7th. And this is where we're going away from the natural minor scale, and we're borrowing chord tones from the harmonic and the melodic minor scale, because the 5 chord is always a dominant 7th chord. So keep that in mind. So 5 chord is G7. So C minor 7, D minor 7 flat 5, E flat major 7, F minor 7, G7. The sixth chord is another half diminished chord, A minor 7 flat 5. Okay, now the final chord, here's the flat 7 of the scale, is B flat 7. So it's a dominant 7th chord. And then finally, if you want to cap it off, go to the 8th tone, back at the 1 chord, C minor 7. So 1 chord C minor 7, 2 chord D minor 7 flat 5, 3 chord E flat major 7, 4 chord F minor 7, 5 chord G7, 6 chord A minor 7 flat 5, 7 chord B flat 7, dominant 7. That is the minor diatonic series of 7th chords. So again, to use the same examples we used before, what's a 2-5-1 chord progression in a minor key? In this case, concert C minor. Okay, well, what's the 2 chord? It's D, and it's a minor 7 flat 5. So 2 chord is D minor 7 flat 5. What's the 5 chord? It's G7. Now, oftentimes in a minor key, you're going to alter that 5 chord. So I'm going to do a G7 flat 13. Okay, and then the 1 chord is C minor 7. So D minor 7 flat 5, G7, C minor 7. Okay, makes sense? That's how you can find out any chord progression in any minor key. Okay, that should be a thorough explanation. Again, if the audio isn't helping you, go to the show notes and check that out so you can kind of see the chart that I have for you there for a more visual picture of what's going on here. All right, now let's put this musical knowledge into practice now. So we're going to use a tune, for example, a jazz standard. This one, it's common. Everybody knows about it. It's Autumn Leaves, okay? You probably either know this song or you've heard this song. Either way, you should know this is one that everybody needs to know. And I like to start this one. And in fact, this is the first jazz standard study in the new book, the Jazz Standards Playbook, because it can teach us so many basic elements of jazz harmony that we need to know. I'm going to go over what those basic elements are in a second. But first, what I want to start out by doing is just so we can get this sound into our ears, hear the chord progression, I'm just going to have these basic, really basic piano voicings going on in the background. These are recordings taken straight from the book, just so you can get these into your ears. I'm going to play the melody over top just so you can hear it, and then we're going to discuss it and see how every single chord functions, okay? Let's do this. All right, so that is the basic melody, just the watered down, genuine, like probably the purest to form version of that melody I can play, along with some very basic piano chords, and probably not the most musical example there, but the point what I wanted to accomplish here is so that you really were listening to those chord qualities without any bass, drums, any mess of anything going on, and be able to hear that in the context of the melody very clearly. Now, as I said, there's some really big, important harmonic lessons that Autumn Leaves teaches. These are fundamental lessons, so listen very closely here. The first lesson is it's a lesson in relative keys. Okay, it's a lesson in relative keys. Now, maybe you've heard the term relative keys before, and maybe you understand it, but maybe you don't. So here's a great definition for you. What are relative keys? Major and minor keys that share the same key signature are called relative keys. So essentially, they share the exact same notes as each other, okay? One more time. Major and minor keys that share the same key signature are called relative keys. They basically have the exact same notes as each other. So Autumn Leaves is in the key of concert G minor. I'm talking concert here. So concert G minor. So if we have a G minor scale, a G relative minor scale, sounds like this. Now, the notes in it are G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, back to G, okay? So in the key signature, there's two flats, B flat, E flat. That's the key of concert G minor. Now, if we take a look at the relative major rather, basically what we can do to find that is just move a minor third up, okay? That's a little quick tip for you. If you're not sure what the relative to the major or the minor key, if you're starting at the minor key, move a minor third up, and that is the relative major key. So in this case, B flat, if we move a minor third up from G, it's B flat, okay? So B flat major is the relative major to G minor. Same with B flat major. If we want to find from B flat major the relative minor, just go a minor third down. Or from a major key, just think what is the sixth tone of a major scale, okay? We also call this aeolian. So if you think about what the sixth tone of a B flat major scale is, it's G. And let's go over that really quick. So the B flat major scale, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, back to B flat, okay? Now again, in the key signature, there's two flats, B flat and E flat. So we're dealing with the exact same notes here. So that's why we call them relative keys. And you're going to see this come up time and time again in jazz harmony, so it's important that you take note of that right away. And now, Autumn Leaves, it's pretty simple because it is only moving, essentially, between the keys of B flat major and G minor, which all share the same key signature. It's moving in and out of the relative minor and the relative major keys. Okay? So that's the first lesson. Now, the second lesson to be learned is in 2-5-1 chord progressions. Now, I've talked about 2-5-1 chord progressions on this show a lot. 2-5-1 chord progressions are the essential chords, the most basic, most common chords, the chord progression rather, that you will find in jazz harmony. And we just went over that when we were doing the harmonic series, right? So if we're going to go into the key of B flat major, we're going to do the same thing we did with the harmonic series. We're harmonizing a B flat major scale with seventh chords. So the two, what's the second tone in the B flat major scale? It's C minor 7. C. So, okay, I just gave it away. C. What is the quality of chord of the 2 chord in a major series? It's minor. So we have C minor 7. What's the 5 chord? So what's the 5th tone of the B flat major scale? It's F. And the 5 chord is what? It's a dominant 7th chord. So it's an F7 chord. And then the 1 chord is, of course, B flat major. B flat major 7. Okay, so C minor 7. F7, B flat major 7, okay? Now quickly, let's go to the relative minor. Let's go to G minor now. What's a 2-5-1 in G minor, okay? Well, what's the second tone of a G minor scale, okay? A. And we already discussed this when we harmonize minor scales with 7th chords. What's the 2 chord? It's a half diminished chord. That's the quality. So we have A minor 7, flat 5. What's the 5 chord? Okay, what's the 5th tone? It's D of the G minor scale. It's D. Now, we discussed that it's a dominant 7th chord, but oftentimes it alters. So I'm going to play a flat 9 really quick. So D7, flat 9. And what's the 1 chord? Of course, it is G minor 7. Okay, so A minor 7, flat 5, D7, flat 9, G minor 7. Now, guess what? There's except for one section I'm going to talk about. That's basically the entire song. Is basically you have 2-5-1 chord progressions moving between the relative major and the relative minor key. Now, there's a few exceptions I'm going to go over. Now, again, if you go to the show notes, it's okay if you're not able to do this right now, but if you go to the show notes, I actually have a really cool color-coded chart for you where I've color-coded basically the different sections of this song, and I've also labeled the Roman numerals underneath them. Basically, what I've done is I've taken the relative major and I've color-coded it in blue. So any chords that are in the relative major are color-coded in blue. Any chords that are in the relative minor or the parent minor key are in red. So G minor is in red and B flat major is in blue. And if you look at this chart, and it's okay if you can't, it's basically only those colors. We'll talk about the one section where it's not. I have it color-coded green there. So let's just start from the very beginning really fast here. We actually start with the relative major, okay? Start with the relative major. So we start with a 2-5-1 chord progression into B flat major. We already know what that is, right? We already went over it. So it's C minor 7 is the 2 chord, F7 is the 5 chord, B flat major is the 1 chord, Okay, now the next chord after this is kind of like a chord that's going to connect the relative major and the parent minor together, and that's E flat major 7. Now, what is E flat to a B flat major key center? Okay, E flat to B flat major key center. Okay, E flat major is the 4. It's the 4th tone. And what's the 4th tone? It's a major 7th chord. That's how you harmonize that, right? So it's an E flat major 7 is the 4 chord. So we have 2, 5, 1, and then 4. 4 major 7, right? That's E flat major 7 in the key of B flat. Now here's where we go from the relative major into the parent minor scale. Now we go into a 2-5-1, a minor 2-5-1 into G minor. Okay? So it's like we just discussed a second ago, A minor 7 flat 5, D7, C minor 7, or sorry, G minor 7. Woo, got that one wrong. Now, some people put this next change in, some people don't, because now we're essentially going to repeat those first 8 bars here, but we're going to throw in a turnaround chord. That's G7, okay? So we're turning that G minor 7 into a G7, and what we call this is a 5 of 2, okay? Because think about it. What's the first chord of the song? It's C minor. Now, we call it a 5 of 2 because if you think about it, if we're like thinking about C minor 7, which is acting as the 2 chord, we can think of it as a 1 chord for a second. So in the key of C minor, what is the 5 chord? Okay, what's the 5th tone of the C minor scale? It's G, which is a dominant 7th chord, right? So basically that 5 chord is going to resolve into the C minor 7 chord. So we call this a turnaround chord because it's taking us from where we just were at the end of these 8 bars here, well, in this case, the 7 bars, and we're going to turn it around back to the top because there's a repeat sign. So it goes 2-5-1 into G minor 7, okay? And then we're going to turn it around, and the way we're going to connect that G minor 7 to that C minor 7 is a G7 chord. Okay, you can also think of this as the 6th dominant chord of the relative major, right? So what's the 6th chord of B flat major 7? It's G. And now in the diatonic sense, the 6th chord is a minor chord, but jazz musicians are always turning minor chords into dominant 7th chords. Okay, so either way you want to think about it, the 5 of 2 or the 6th chord of the relative minor turning around into the C minor chord at the top of the form again. Okay, so then we go through it again. C minor 7, 2, F7, 5, B flat major 7, 1, E flat major 7, 4. Now into the parent minor. 2, A minor 7 flat 5, D7 is the 5, G minor 7 the 1. Okay, now the second ending, you don't play that G7. Just you hang out on the G minor 7. Okay, does that make sense? Now, again, we're not just analyzing all these chords from the parent minor key center or the parent key major key center. It'd be really tough to do that. It's just not the most efficient way to do it. But, like I said, these are relative keys to each other. So, for example, the A minor 7 flat 5, that's the 2 chord in G minor, right? But what is A minor 7 flat 5 to B flat major, the relative major? Well, it's the 7th chord, right? The 7th chord is a half diminished in a major key center. So A minor 7 flat 5 is the 7th tonal center, 7th chord of B flat major. Okay? So that makes sense. But the thing is, when we discussed earlier, when you harmonize minor scales with 7th chords, we have to borrow notes from the harmonic and melodic minor scale, right? We needed to make that 5 chord into a dominant 7th chord. So a D7, which is the 5 chord in G minor, right? Now that note is in the B flat major scale, D is, but it would normally be a minor 7th chord, right? But it's a dominant 7 in this particular case because we're borrowing those chord tones, okay? So that's where things start to get a little bit different when we're talking about major and minor keys, okay? But so at the end of the day, you can relate a lot of these chords to each other, but it's best to think about them separated into major keys and relative minor keys and vice versa. I hope that makes sense. Now, if any of that confused you, don't get freaked out or anything. It's nothing to get worked up about. Okay, now when we get into the bridge, okay, this is the part that goes, and since you went away, the days grow long. Okay, learn the lyrics, great lyrics. Okay, so then it's just we start the bridge out with a minor 2-5-1 into G minor 7, the parent scale. So A minor 7 flat 5, 2, D7, 5, G minor 7 is 1. Okay. All right, and then we go back into the relative major. And soon I'll hear old winter song. I'll start singing for you guys. It's going to hurt you. Okay, so that's just a 2-5-1 into the relative major. Okay, then we go back into the minor key. So, but I miss you most of all. I promise I'd stop singing, but I'm still doing it. My darling. Okay, 2-5-1 into G minor. Now, here is the one part that I've separated out. Now, oftentimes, musicians are doing these chord changes. Right here, it goes G minor 7, C7, F minor 7, B flat 7. And then it finishes off the song with a 2-5-1 into G minor. A minor 7, flat 5, D7, G minor 7. So those two bars there, the G minor 7, C7, F minor 7, B flat 7. If you are able to look at the show notes, I've color-coded that green. So how to make the best sense of this is just to think of it as a cycle of fourths. Now, all the time in jazz, we're cycling in fourths. Think about a 2-5-1 chord progression really quick. So let's think about the relative major. C minor 7, F7, B flat 7. The roots of all those notes, of all those chords, C, F, B flat. What are they moving in? What's the interval they're moving in? Fourths, okay? Pretty much most functional harmony in jazz is moving in fourths. Not always, but most of the time, it's all cycling in fourths. So that's simply all this is doing. It's trying to connect us from that G minor 7 back around to get back to the A minor 7 again, but in a more creative way, okay? So it's landing on the one chord there. And you can think of that C7 as the minor, basically a 4-7 of the minor key, but that's kind of confusing. So it's best just to think of it as like 2-5. So G minor 7, C7, that's like a 2-5 into F, but we're not going there. We're going to F minor and then to B flat 7, which you can think of as a 2-5 to E flat. And if you're totally lost right now, don't worry about this. It's okay. But just think of it as 2-5 cycling in fourths. So we start A minor 7 flat 5, but I miss you most of all, my darling. 5, 2, 5. When autumn leaves start to fall. Okay, does that make sense? Maybe, maybe not. But don't get too hung up on it. Again, if you can go to the show notes, it looks a little bit more clear there what's going on. But otherwise, think about it. This song is just 2-5-1 chord progressions, maybe with the exception of that 4 chord in the major, the E flat major, in the parent minor and the relative major. What an easy song, right? If you understand what the relative keys are, if you understand how to harmonize major scales and minor scales with seventh chords, if you understand the Roman numeral system, and you understand 2-5-1 chord progressions, I mean, this song is a piece of cake, right? And that's why I always start with this song when I deal with students and stuff like that, because it's so easy to understand. But at the same time, if you know these fundamentals right here, it's going to set you up for success for every single jazz standard you learn after this. Guarantee it. And then throughout the rest of the book that I was just telling you about, the Jazz Standards Playbook, that's going to be coming out in April, we dig deeper into jazz standards after that get even more complex, and so we can start understanding more harmony. But this is a great starting point. So what I want you to have gotten from today is understanding relative keys, understanding 2-5-1 chord progressions, and understanding how we come up with the Roman numeral system in the first place. And again, those 3 basic elements that I went over earlier that you need to analyze. I'll review those. Number 1, what is the form? Number 2, what are the defining characteristics of the song? Number 3, how are jazz musicians historically approaching it? And if you can do all those things, you're going to be setting yourself up on the right foot. All right, that's all for today's show. I want to thank you so much for listening. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, if you need a little more visual on some of this stuff, go to the show notes, learnjazzstandards.com/episode 105. Now, as I always say, if you got value at today's podcast episode, leave us a rating and review on iTunes. Say some nice words, or Stitcher, whatever you listen to your podcasts on. Helps other people find the show. So thank you in advance for doing that if you got some help from the episode today. Now, next week, I'm excited to continue on Jazz Standards Month. Once you've learned a jazz standard, once you've analyzed it like we just did, you understand how the harmony functions, where do you go from there? Well, you want to start being able to improvise over it. And how do you do that? So we're going to be going over exactly that, how you can start mapping out that jazz standard for improvisational success. So I'll see you next week back in episode 106.
Thanks for listening to the LJS podcast, brought to you by LearnJazzStandards.com. Subscribe to the series on iTunes, and don't forget to join our jazz community at LearnJazzStandards.com/newsletter.